here.
Okay.
We just want to go around the table and everybody introduce themselves.
I'm Connor, Connor Beverly, engineer medic for Deltona.
It started working.
Okay.
First time
That's the business.
part of negotiations.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Jim Brantley with Donnelly and Gross, here representing the union throughout bargaining.
Okay.
John Vaccaro, union president, giving these guys some mentors on their first time.
Good morning, John Fleming, Lieutenant with Deltona Fire Department, here representing Local 2913, Secretary and lead negotiator, point of contact between the city and ourselves.
Michael Drew, Deltona Lieutenant, brand new. I'm the new guy he was talking about. For one up.
Deputy Chief Swisher, here as part of the city's team.
Good. I'm Stacy Kiffalo. I'm the Deputy City Manager for the City of Deltona.
Chris Wallaby, consultant.
John O'Grady, Public Safety Advisor for the city.
Okay. I understand that you all were bringing copies of contracts for us today.
We are. So we had indicated to you previously that our plan for today, and it was our plan, to bring you a complete opening proposal bargaining. We are bringing you a complete agreement minus 4 articles. We're going to hold back, and I'll explain those in a minute.
Okay.
We also have some proposed ground rules that we'd like to share and get your thoughts about and see if we can reach agreement on this just from a functionality standpoint moving forward. These are more practical ground rules regarding the exchange of proposals.
Thank you.
So we propose that if we're going to exchange proposals in electronic format, that they be done in MS Word format. We are proposing that the parties exchange proposals in legislative format with strike through, underline and bold, with existing language remaining in normal font. Additionally, our proposal is that both sides footnote their proposals, each page of their proposals indicating whose proposal it was and the date, so that it's easier to keep track of chronologically, you know, where we were in terms of the exchange of proposals and ideas. I work from a notebook. I don't know if anybody else does, so our proposal includes a request that proposals be 3-hole punched. And that an agreement that as we reach a tentative agreement on proposals, the principals from both sides initial the proposals so that we can set it aside and kind of have an understanding that at least we have a tentative agreement on that article and can move on.
Thank you.
There's a thumb drive with everything we're giving you today, which is again a complete opening contract proposal minus 4 articles, and I'll go over that in a minute. How do we have any feedback on the suggested ground rules? Thoughts? Any problems with any of that?
I wasn't expecting a consultant, and I figured I'd rather give him the thumb drive.
I'm good. I see how it's gonna go. I got it.
I'll shoot you a copy.
All right, the next thing I want to give you
I'll get a
is,
copy.
in this proposal,
Thank you.
I don't know how many of these.
That was a quick delegation.
Right?
Yeah, they just give them 3 pages at a time. That should be enough for everybody. If you need more, there's more here. I'll let you get these first. Our proposal we're going to give to you is in large part status quo articles. There are 37 articles that our proposal says we're willing to TA status quo. So I've given you a list of those.
Thank you.
On the second page, you'll see that Article 44 was included on that list. And that was an error that should have been removed. That's one of the 4 articles we will not be giving you today. But the rest of those are articles that from our opening proposal represents status quo language. Our hope is that if we can, you know, maybe at some point today or tomorrow, we'd like to, if the city has no desire to open those or is in agreement that the existing language is satisfactory, like to TA as many of those today or tomorrow as possible, and start whittling down kind of where the real issues are. In the proposal we've given you today, there are 9 articles in which there is some language change, and I think 2 of them, possibly 3 of them, when I say there's a language change, it's a typo. We're fixing something or changing a single word to reflect what's currently done, and we'll explain that as we go through. Those articles that we have some language change to that are not absolute status quo are 6 union business, 11 civil emergency conditions, 13 operational reserves, 16 overtime and callback, 22 health benefits, 35 performance evaluation, 39 vacation plan, 45 parental leave, and 48 longevity. Now, of course, in there are some substantive changes. The 4 that we are not giving you yet, they're not complete. We've got some more background homework to do. We're waiting on some documents, and there's some additional documents we want to gather. Are the 4 that you will not get in this package are 17 wages, 18 incentives, 34 pension plan, and 44 educational assistance program. Any questions about any of that? What I'd like to do is walk through these in order and address kind of the 9 that we are proposing changes to and provide you some kind of explanation or background with regard to those. All right, so the first 5 articles, 1 through 5, are on your status quo list. So our proposal is that those first 5 articles remain status quo. The first one that we are proposing a change to is Article 6, Union Business. And our change, it comes in Section 3. And what the union's wanting to move to, and quite frankly, I don't know why more unions aren't. This is the first union that's thought about this, and it should be done everywhere in this electronic age, is they want to go to an electronic bulletin board in the stations in lieu of the old court board with printed materials put up, so that it's easier for them to update and disseminate the information to the electronic board that can be done wirelessly and through the internet. The proposal would keep in the language about the rules being subject to the same conditions as the printed materials used to be with regard to the city's ability to control the printed materials. But we just want to move to an electronic format. The board itself would be paid for and maintained by the union at no cost to the city, and it would use the union's Wi-Fi in the stations. Any questions about that?
I have a question.
Mhm.
Is there gonna be a board placed on the admin side too, so we know what the union's posting up on the?
I see no problem with it, if you guys wanna provide the monitor, and then it's not an issue for me, because what's the difference between you walking into the fire station and
Right.
looking on the board?
Make it easier for you to
50
review the
feet.
materials, they
Yeah.
don't have to be printed then, and, yeah.
I
If
mean,
you
if-
see something on there that is popping up on the electronic monitor and have an objection, the same as you would had you seen it on the posted,
Mhm.
address it with the union,
If that makes it workable.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm just confused that we've had bulletin boards for 25 years.
Well, because my intent would be down, on the administration side would be that maybe we share that board eventually, or even in this negotiation, and maybe some other things from the fire department might be placed on that board also.
Okay,
It's
Share and share, like-
it's a great way to disseminate information. It's the same thing with the signage, electronic
Absolutely.
signage
Yep.
in the city, so.
I have no problem with it
if-
personally,
yeah.
but.
and it's
I
a
mean,
lot
honestly,
easier
to
than
see what
printing the
happens,
materials and driving
because
around
we've
to the
been so
stations,
successful in
as
sharing.
everybody
I don't
else
think we even share
putting a push
Facebook
pin
anymore.
on
They're
the
not allowed to post anything across the way.
list.
So, I mean, I'm
Just hold off, we'll figure it out at the
yeah,
end.
definitely workable.
All right, the next is Article 11. This is one of the couple or three that are simply a typo. Section 2 had B in a different format, paragraph B under section 2, so we've just cleaned that up and moved it out to make it the same. The B in that paragraph was labeled differently.
Jump in there, Jim? So, just so you guys know, we made a clean copy for the last time we negotiated a contract. We produced a clean copy, we submitted it to the city, it got turned back, and because we signed the copy with clerical errors and spelling errors, the city manager wanted it to be the copy we used. So, if you do see copies floating around with a lot of clerical errors, that's the reason. It was, for some reason, we went back to the messed up copy.
And what is the cleanup in B?
Just, you see how they're, in the indent,
Just got rid of the
there's a
B.
B, that's the way it was.
Oh, gotcha.
It didn't reflect, so we just moved it out and labeled the paragraph with a B period rather than.
You also have in the last sentence, they may, as one word, if you wanted to.
Well, and here's the other thing, here's the other thing
I'm
we were
just
doing.
saying.
We converted this from PDF to work from it, and it has been, it does so much wonky stuff when
It
you're trying
does.
to work with it and moving words
It
together.
does. No,
Yeah.
these, like I've run into that too, where it looks like there's
Oh, yeah.
not a space, and then you go into Word and there actually is a
Well,
space.
the other thing it does in the conversion is it occasionally will take a word and convert it to a, instead of the word, it's a series of symbols.
Yeah.
For whatever reason.
So
And I was
yeah.
dealing yesterday with indent problems. And it's got embedded indentations, and when you get to the page that has it, I'm not savvy enough, and it will not drop that indentation. You have to skip the whole page.
And on your thumb drive copy, there is a space for they may, so it's just,
Yeah, it's weird.
So it's in the contract to have it in Word, unfortunately, I don't know what
That's
happened.
fine, but not the paper printed.
yeah.
It
But
was a PDF.
now we have a full history on why all these clerical errors do exist.
No clue.
All right, the next article is Article 13, operational reserves. The department doesn't have reserves anymore, so this language is obsolete, and there's a couple of places today our recommendation is to remove obsolete language, stuff that's already been completed or no longer applicable, and this is one. We'd like to just keep, the title can stay on it if you want, but we'll just keep it a blank article. I think we've got another article later in the package that's the same way. But it's just, there are none, so.
Is this something that is a trend and something that you don't see coming back?
We don't necessarily see it coming back or not coming back. We looked at this article and we said, we do not have reserves at this time. In the history of this department, from what I understand, and Chief Swisher and John can speak to it more, they're more senior, but we've had reserves. They've come and
Yeah.
gone on more than one occasion. So that's why we saw to change this and take it out.
I think in Florida, because of the extreme involvement that fire departments have in EMS delivery, it's harder to maintain reserves for people to have a work life and say, yeah, I'll make myself available for emergency call, because, you know, if they're getting called away from work 6 or 7 times a day for EMS related emergencies, the employers start putting the kibosh on it, whereas in smaller communities, if their response is really fire related and it's a reserve or volunteer type thing, and they're called out once or twice a month, it's not a big deal, and it's community service, and it doesn't overtax the members. So I think all around Florida, departments either long ago got to the level or are getting to the level where, to the extent that they've used reserves or volunteers or part paid, they just can't keep them. They can't keep people interested because of the volume of call load.
To answer your question, reserves doesn't come from us. It was only put in the contract because of the relationship between the union and the administration, and the city removed it last contract.
Removed?
They got rid of reserves. We
What do you
didn't.
mean?
They ended the reserve program. We
The
didn't.
city did?
Yes.
Bush?
What?
The city completely got rid of the reserve program?
I wasn't even paying attention, I'm sorry.
No, I said that we put, to answer a question about reserves coming back, because of our relationship, we put reserves in the contract because we had the kids and stuff that could possibly move over, so
Right.
it was to bolster that program, but the last contract, the city got rid of the, well, I guess it's reserve slash, what were the kids called?
Operation.
Well, that's what I was
So-
gonna say, really, this article really never really fit anyways, because they were really explorers,
Right.
not reserves. So we've never actually used this article
Right.
ever that I can think of.
Yeah, there was a goal to put
Since
it
I've
in
been
here
here.
to move forward with the Explorers, and then the city ended the Explorer program.
Yeah.
So it kind of was a 3-year plan that went about a year,
Okay.
and they just did away with that. So
And
I have no idea why they didn't bring it. They took it out. I mean,
no interest on the fire department side to have such an option?
We'd have to talk to the chief for sure on that, but
well, it would be the city manager.
I can
makes
tell
most of
you,
the decisions,
I don't
so.
personally have an interest in it, but, because I would much rather, become involved with the high school, with their academy program, than I would be with reserves on the trucks,
Okay.
personally.
Okay.
But you'd have to clarify that with the chief.
All right, the next article is Article 16, overtime callback. And we have in this article proposed some cleanup and a substantive change. The first change is in section 4.
You have a typo in 2C here with the indentation.
Section 2C.
What if it's different on the paper again?
Right.
Sorry.
Because somebody.
Yeah, it's right here.
Yeah, it's got a big old space in it. It's almost like somebody
Yeah,
tabbed it or something.
that was
So-
certainly due to the format.
But on
Oh,
the-
yours is way out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this one too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is mine.
Right
On here it's fine, like,
It starts
it's
over
fine.
here. The sentence starts
Is this
over
the
here.
old
Oh, it's
contract?
over.
Is this the old
Oh,
contract,
so you
or
guys
this
converted.
isn't the
This is
proposal?
the 2 days ago one I printed.
Okay.
Okay, okay, sorry guys. Some reason it came out right 2 days ago.
Same thing
and-
in D,
Yeah, it's
or
weird.
not same thing, you got another. You're
Well, if
probably
you
gonna
could,
see it.
if you check your electronic copy, maybe
Okay.
you could just replace the page. Is that okay?
We printed
That's fine.
today.
Or, I mean, I'll certainly clean it up wherever I can
No,
clean it
mine's
up.
the same.
No, as long as we identify that we're cleaning things up.
Yeah,
That's the
all
whole
right.
idea, just in case.
Sounds good.
How much is on the electronic side? It's still like this.
I'm looking at it.
I can't see. It's
fine.
hard to see.
And then D, you said
Yeah,
D,
you're good.
and so it has a different bracket on D.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, it does. Electronic side.
Yeah, you're gonna find a lot of these from not the conversion, but from the last time. I actually have a clean copy that we made and submitted, but.
B above is just like that. That's weird. Okay.
thank you
Okay.
for bringing that up.
8.
In section 4, you'll see strike through regarding
Write it down.
language that says that the policy is not established within 120 days from contract ratification, past practice shall rule. The policy was established, so that's language that's no longer needed. And substantively, both in section 4 and 7, we're proposing to make two forms of overtime productive under the FLSA for calculation of overtime hours. In 4, COVID here and every place else has increased the occurrence of mandatory overtime, particularly as it relates to paramedics. If someone has used sick leave in the same work period and then is mandated in on overtime, if that isn't counted as productive, then they end up getting it straight time. So they can be mandated in on their day off for a 24-hour shift at straight time because in that work period they had utilized sick leave. So to remedy the mandatory overtime issue in 4, we're proposing that all mandatory overtime hours should be treated as productive hours for the purposes of overtime calculation under the FLSA, so that they will not get kind of dinged or I don't know if punishment's the right word, but they won't get dinged on the halftime if in that work calculation, FLSA work period, they happen to have used sick leave. And then down in 7 is addressing another problem that is coming up both here and every place else with regard to CDC quarantine policies. So every time someone is either initially symptomatic or is exposed to someone who is COVID positive, they're ordered to quarantine. I think the old period was 14. I think it's down to 10 days or shorter now with a test. Okay. When that occurs and they're ordered to quarantine, and then they get overtime, they were quarantined through no fault of their own. And on the quarantine, it's, I guess, sick leave. They're using sick leave to quarantine at the request of the employer, and understandably. But then if they clear their quarantine and they're back in the same work cycle and they work overtime, that overtime again is straight time. So in 7, we're proposing that anytime an employee works overtime and then is ordered by the city to quarantine away from work in that same FLSA work period, due to exposure to communicable disease, the overtime hours shall be counted as productive under the FLSA. So essentially 2 substantive changes. One is all mandatory overtime would be counted as productive, period, regardless of whether sick leave was used in that work period or not. And then in 7, if someone works any overtime in the same work period where they have been ordered to quarantine, that overtime will be considered productive under the FLSA.
And in section 4, you have a strikeout through personnel who were mandated. You want to get rid of that? Is that what you?
No, it says if this policy is not established, that.
Right below that.
Or not. Yeah, I explained that. We are taking that out. Wasn't that related to?
I think.
Where is it?
Right here.
I think that policy was
Which one
established,
is it?
so that's in the policy. If
It's-
it's policy.
Yeah, it's
Is
part
that
of
in the
department
policy?
policy.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Bush, this is covered in the policy?
I'd have to double check it, but it should be, yes.
All right, yeah, we'll
Oh,
do
that
it.
goes back in.
But-
There was an agreement to draft that policy, and it was ultimately drafted, and so that's done.
Yeah, if it's not in the policy, which I believe it is in the policy, right?
It's in the policy.
Yeah.
That's the reason for the strike through, but, I mean, based on that premise, if it's, we see that it's not in the policy for whatever reason, which it's in the policy,
Yeah.
we would prefer to keep that language in.
The next is Article 22, health benefits. And in section 5, there was language that made reference to a commitment to work towards the creation of a VIVA. It's my understanding the city is entertaining or looking at possibly a city-wide VIVA for post-employment health insurance. And so, from the union's perspective, our desire would be to be included in the citywide VIBA, and to the extent that that's moving forward, this language is no longer necessary.
Yeah, I don't think we ever did anything with it over the 4 years. I don't think there was any real movement, so if it's going that way, that's good.
The next article is 35, performance evaluation. In section 1, we're proposing language that would allow the union and the fire chief to work together to develop a plan to create a system of points, promotional points, to be awarded to employees in the promotional process based on their performance evaluation. So the better someone scores on their performance evaluation would be converted to some formula of points to be added to and enhance the promotional process to allow those people to have a slight leg up in the promotional process as it goes through.
Jim, what article was it?
35, page 55 of 95.
36?
I wasn't, no, I went to a different article to make a note.
The page numbers are a little off.
55?
Going
backwards. Thank you.
So how that works out and what it looks like can be worked out at a later date between the union and the fire chief.
And you said you added language?
Yeah, in section 1, at the bottom of section 1, performance evaluations may be used in awarding points for promotional exams. This process must be agreed upon by the fire chief and the union president.
Jim?
35, you're on 36.
That helps. Gotcha. Thank you.
Any questions about that? The next is Article 39, vacation plan. Starts on page 67 of 95, and our change comes on page 68. And this is cleanup. In section 4, the current practice is 5 employees are allowed off on vacation or union time pool. This language, because it was 4 years old, reflected 4. So this is a change to stick in the word 5 and the number 5, and that's not really a substantive change. It reflects what current practice is, and that's the only change in vacation.
Hey, section 8,
Yes.
there's a J instead of an I on vacation.
That's what I was looking for, compared to my copy.
Alright.
The new-
And then there's also like
Yeah,
a
there's a couple in there.
underline thing
What are you still about?
on section 8.
Section.
Hey, I just have a question.
Gotcha.
Whoever, John Fleming,
Go ahead.
you guys wanna leave, cause I know prior to negotiations, we talked about taking the vacation, annual picks out of the vacation and making it a policy. Is that still, you guys still you don't wanna do that? You know,
I was gonna leave it up to
I don't care, it's up to y'all.
Up to you guys if that's a direction you wanted to go in,
Just
be
easier
honest
to
with
change
you.
when we make, like, when we switch to crew sense or
Well,
did
yeah,
changes.
that's what I was gonna leave it up to you guys, cause I really don't know where you guys are gonna go with. you
Okay,
know,
but
those
that's something that-
programs. Yeah, so whatever you guys present, we'll take
Okay.
a look at. I mean,
Okay.
we've always been pretty
Yeah.
flexible on trying to work with
Nope,
whatever
I'm just
programs
asking.
you have. But I didn't wanna make a change and then screw you if the county doesn't, or we don't get the funding for the program.
So just to clarify, we're gonna take a look at taking the vacation pick process.
Well, I mean, that's
out of the
That's
document
between
in the
them, but I
future.
mean, yeah, that, I know we talked about it in the past, like, we talked about it in the past.
Mhm.
That's why I'm just asking.
Our only concern was to make sure that we don't put ourselves in a position where that whole vacation pick process could be stood on its head or changed unilaterally. We would wanna make sure that there's language that ensures that if it's changed, it's gonna be done
Yeah,
mutually.
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, no, I'm not trying to take
No,
away
I-
anything from
yeah,
it.
you know, I got you. I remember we talked about it, and I don't know where you guys are at with it. It's kinda like the veto. It just won't.
All right, the next change is in Article 45, parental leave. In Section 2 at the bottom of the page, we're proposing that the rules outlined in the article and the leave provided for in the article be made applicable to employees who adopt a child 7 years old or younger, and giving the fire chief the discretion to allow the policy and the leave to be applied to the adoption of an employee who adopts a child 7 years old or older, or above the age of 7.
Why did you pick 7 years?
So to be honest with you, we looked at like, the need for the time off, and that's why we kind of judged for the city's sake, rather than just leave it a blanket, you can adopt a teenager. We kind of picked 7 because under that age, you have that, you know, the higher sick rate, they need a lot more, parenting, I would say. So we took 7 years old based on being able to have the chief decide, say somebody gets an 8-year-old that has a developmental issue. He can then come in and say, okay, we're gonna give them the same amount of extended leave, because it's a very leave-heavy article, and we didn't wanna burden the city with a, you know, carte blanche, somebody gets a 21-year-old, and they have these months off. So really, we picked 7 to make it easier for the city, with an option for you guys to look at that and change it as needed.
And to be honest with you, I expected that question, and I was like, I went down that rabbit hole, thought it through, and I'm like, I can call up 10 child psychologists, and they can make an argument for any number I give them, because it's tough. It's a tough deal, you know. And then, but if we have a guy who goes out, marries somebody who has children from a pre-existing relationship, but those kids are 15, 16 years old, like John said, they most likely in most cases don't need as much attention as the younger kids.
So basically, the age is to help the city manage that kind of adoption, because, you know, it's pretty prevalent right now. I mean, if you guys wanna go with 0 and doesn't matter, I'm good with that too.
The next change is in Article 48, longevity. In Section 2, currently, lieutenants and the operations division chief are included in the second tier of the longevity benefit, which is 10 cents per hour per year of service. Our proposal is to break them out of that tier, leave the engineer rank as the lone job classification in the second tier, and create a third tier at 15 cents per hour per year of service longevity for members holding the rank of any officer level position. That'd be any position above the rank of engineer. And we've included it, we this is not proposed language, it just got, as we were discussing it, it got typed in there, but we estimate the cost of that to be about $3,139. That, adding that benefit, changing, there's a currently included in the 10 cents level, so they would be increasing that by 5 cents. So the proposal doesn't include that cost language, that was just for matter of discussion.
And that's total for all officers, not per officer.
Yeah, that's all that would be receiving it currently, based on the current count. And finally, I didn't include it, but, I mean, I didn't include it because it's, 51 is really an additional article in which we proposing changes because we have to change the dates on the agreement. But our proposal would be for a 4-year agreement, 22 to 26, with no reopeners. It would be a locked-in agreement unless by mutual agreement during the term we find the need to open and address something midterm. So that's really a 10th article that has to have changes. And with regard to the 4 that we did not give you, we're trying to make sure that we do our due diligence through this last contract term. There were at least 3 that I'm aware of MOUs that were signed that were various, and some of them were fairly complex issues having to do with. I know one of them had to do with transport fees and the use of transport fees and seat pay and that kind of stuff. So we're going back, pulling those 4 articles out to make sure that we go through those MOUs, and to the extent that those provisions in those MOUs weren't sunsetted, and some of them were. Some of them were for a specific duration, I think a 2-year duration. Others were longer-term commitments and kind of reflect the status quo. And where our proposal would include that, we want to make sure that that language and those elements of those MOUs are imported into the proper areas of the CBA, so they reflect kind of what we have already agreed to moving forward. We also want to kind of have a discussion about, and maybe some of this will be intertwined with that, having to do with everybody's fighting for paramedics now. And so to the extent possible in those 4 remaining articles, we want to make sure that we incentivize paramedics and that we make it as easy as possible for new employees to pay for and get time off for their paramedic training, so we can cut down on the amount of overtime and mandatory overtime and openings related to that job classification or that specialty moving forward. So we're taking a look at those MOUs and that paramedic issue, and we'll be bringing you proposals on those remaining 4 articles in the future. Any questions on any of this? Yeah, to that end, there was in one of the MOUs, there had been an accumulated amount, at the time we were doing the MOU, there was an accumulated amount of received transport revenues that existed, and there was discussion, some of the MOU makes reference to that amounts pulled from those accumulated amounts. And some of the MOU talks about commitments on future amounts that come in annually. But in some of those things that we had committed portions of the existing accumulated revenues at that time, and we know that revenues have continued to come in from the transport, there's a question about how much was left from that. So I know that some of those things were never expended. Like I think there was a 2-year thing for the chief, an EMS chief, because as we took this on, we knew that there had to be some kind of administrative oversight structure, right, to take on this additional work. And there's discussion about using a portion of those accumulated amounts in the first 2 years to offset the costs or fund the costs of, I think, an EMS chief position and a quality assurance.
Which we did
The quality assurance person's been hired, so those funds are utilized. But
Well, she was.
Okay.
Well,
All
it
right,
was
well-
just to fund the position for
Right.
you guys, because at the time we had a need for, QA. It saves the city a huge liability, so the union used some of the accumulated funds to offset the cost for the administration to hire a QA person. Basically, because of the extended time it would take to run through the process to get those funds through the city and to have it allocated and all that stuff. There was a high need, so that's why we did it, but
And
we
then-
also put a bunch of funds for other things.
And there was concern, and you know, this is not uncommon elsewhere either, that if these things, we had the unique opportunity here because the city was just getting into transport. So the city hadn't gotten into transport and hadn't had those revenue streams in the past. And elsewhere, I think there are plenty of examples of places where those EMS transport revenues, particularly in city and county government, they kind of disappear into the general fund and they go away. And so if there's no initial commitment they come back to make sure that we have the structure, and I think there was language in there about safety equipment, sanitizing equipment. There was language in there about the training center, committing them to the training center. Language about funding the first 2 years of those two classifications. We put in seat pay because one of the other issues were we knew this was going to be a kind of a wholesale change for the bargaining unit members, in that the people on those rescues were really going to very likely be getting hammered, and we wanted to incentivize to make it kind of recognize that their workload was about to go up. And so we put the seat pay in and funded it out of that and captured. So looking back at those MOUs, there was a conscious discussion about making sure, because the city had kind of come to that transport thing, kind of had to be drug transport at the early discussions, kind of kicking and screaming. The city wasn't all that interested and didn't think there'd be any revenue from it, and kind of pushed back to the union about wanting to take the county's offer, which, you know, to be honest, for 40 years, probably, 40 years? Yeah, probably 40 years or 45 years, cities in Volusia County have been fighting to get the right to transport. And when the county opened the window, it was a great opportunity for cities, and I think the union felt, you know, that we waited 45 years for this and really did the homework and presentations to urge the city to take advantage and take the county's offer, and let's get into it. And I think rightfully the union knew that there would be some revenue streams flowing from that, billables, and it has turned out that's so. So, you know, I think it's important to us that we keep those commitments, to keep a portion of those revenues kind of committed to supporting the structure of the fire department and the delivery of the EMS services, and the people that are providing the labor for those revenues. Any questions about anything
I have a question regarding 35, the change that you had asked for. It's performance evaluations and having points from the performance evaluation as part of promotion. It may be better suited for section 36, which actually talks about promotions and assessments, so it doesn't get lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, that's fine with us.
So basically, that's to refer to past conversations that there's a want of the city and the city manager to move more towards a point value.
Right.
Okay, so that's why that's in there. So honestly,
We don't have heart.
wherever you want to put it, that was for you guys to have an avenue to start moving towards that direction.
Okay.
So you'd like it to be moved to
36.
We'll entertain it in wherever it fits best this time.
Well, honestly, it would have to be in 36 anyways, because 36 details how scoring works. So it'd have to be in there, whether you leave it in the performance evaluation and put it in 36, but it has to be in 36 in order to calculate.
Yeah, that's for you
Yeah,
guys.
yeah,
It's a.
Well, that's for you
it's-
too. You
I know,
gotta
but we
take a
want to
look at
open
that.
up the door and
Yeah.
wherever you, I
Wherever
don't
it
really
lands
know
is
what you're
fine.
proposing.
Yeah.
So the question I had, if you don't mind, I apologize.
I mean, you could leave that there in 35 and then go into the process
Yes.
executed
So-
in language in 36.
So this question I had, and we can do a public information request, or we can request it from your team, but transport monies recouped by the city shall be returned to fire department when exceed $100,000. It'll be utilized for additional reimbursement, blah, blah, blah. So, we actually need a number of what's back in that account, because then if you do the MOU, it says account will be created and the money will go, so we don't really know what's in there. That's always been
That would help us move
directed by
forward.
the city, so that's why two of the articles are directly related to that. And we realized that we would have to either come to you or do a public information request to get that number.
So, John, do you have that handy? Which MOU specifically are you
We
referencing?
can get it.
Here.
Just use
No,
us on
no,
that.
that's, I mean, I thought maybe you had it there.
It's fine. No, I just have a note from when I did the contract. These are the things that come up when we were doing it, and unfortunately, we have to pull certain things because those numbers are not easily utilized. I mean, I do get a printout every month of the money that's coming in, but for me
It's the same
to-
MOU
Okay.
with the transport.
Bigger.
Yeah, it's in the MOU that was dated 14 December 2020.
You want a copy?
No, I have them. I just
Okay. And it talks
wanted to
about,
make sure that I was referencing the same thing when I get back to finance and say, here's this one, get a rundown.
yeah, and it starts with the, kind of the section 2. And that's where it laid out the 120,000 of transport funds from fiscal year 2021 and 21-22 to offset the city's costs for the EMS assistant chief, and the 60,000 per year of 2021, 21-22 for the EMS quality assurance. And this section 2, it starts about where we were originally kind of distributing or spending that accumulated amount. It says that Union City agree, Article 44 of the collective bargaining agreement, that $100,000 of transport fees per year will go to the city's general fund, so that came off the top. And the remainder to the fire department for education of bargaining unit members, department training, and overtime for training of on-duty members. There was no caps. There was no cap on the additional funds being allocated to the fire department. Residual funds in the transport fee account, so we're back to talking about those residual funds, carry forward to the negotiating point future contract as to the percentage above 100,000 going to the general fund. And then it said 20,000 of the current accumulated funds moved to an account to be utilized solely for additional education of bargaining unit members, department training, and overtime. So whatever that 20% amount of the accumulated, 150,000 of the current accumulated went to the development of the fire department training center. 75,000 of the current accumulated transport went to purchase sanitation equipment for the transport units. So that was actually, I'm sorry, I said paragraph cruise, there's actually paragraph 3 talks about the accumulated amounts.
So, being
Yeah.
Oh, I apologize. So, Chief, what I did through the union was there was a substantial amount of money, basically a historically new revenue stream brought in, right? So what we did as a union is we produced an MOU, even though we did have it in the contract that anything above $100,000 went to us, the revenue greatly increased. We did a 5-year plan probably 7 years ago on actual revenue coming back into the city per zip code, and we based an entire feasibility study around the union and the union funding, and that feasibility said that with 2 units it would bring in about 1.6 million. There was some resistance to that number, that it wasn't real, so we put in the contract that would give the first 100,000 to the city, then all the rest would come back to the union and the fire department. So the union president and the chief would make a decision where those monies go to best suit the fire department, without the political, input. Then we found out that it was almost $100,000 a month, right? I mean, we're pretty high on it, So instead of no nanny boo, we worked with our attorney to write an MOU to historically kinda the union paid for administrative positions, QA, chief for EMS, and a lot of other stuff like sanitation equipment, like we're first in the county. Yeah, first in the county, we use UV, and we have aeroclaves for all our units. We were way ahead of the game for COVID. So that's kind of where we were spending the money. It really didn't benefit other than seat pay, but that's this historic thing, wherever you're from.
And the problem that you want clarification for has
So-
from,
So no, there's no problem. What we need to do is we need to find out, A, what's left of that 20%, and B, with the value coming in at $100,000+ a month, what the account holds. Because we don't have a value of what that account is to distribute more money to say the training building that we move forward.
And
and
the-
finance can get that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the MOUs recognize that, listen, when we got back to the table, especially as this thing evolved, this was all gonna be subject to bargaining moving forward. But we did have some commitments on that original accumulated amount that we kind of need to know what the balance of that original 20%, what's in that educational account. And then to get a handle on how much money there is how much has been coming in, and what's the current balance with regard to that now, so that as we move all of those things into the contract and address moving forward, what, if anything, we're gonna do with that money, or some of that money moving forward. We just need to know how much we're talking about.
Yeah, basically a full accounting, like where we went other than that.
So what happened to the money that was allocated to, as an example, say the EMS chief? Then they did it.
They have not, there is no EMS chief.
Well, that's what I mean.
Well,
So is that,
Yeah,
is that money
As far as I know, it
utilized
just
in a
never got
different-
moved.
Okay,
So
so
it's-
it's still,
So I
But
paid
I
for
think the MOU said if it wasn't done
till the end of this contract.
by the end of this contract,
I extended it all the way to the end of this contract to
It
reduce an
it says if
EMS.
it doesn't, if it's not done, the monies would go back, return back to the training side.
yeah, so that's, if it ends up not being done, utilized for those, then
returns.
it goes to that training
That
fund.
account.
well, would it be safe to say that your EMS program's grown to the point where it really needs a chief?
Well,
Officer.
that's why I
We knew
paid
that
for
going
it.
in. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's why we
used to
wanted
have
it.
an EMS chief.
Oh,
We had
okay.
an EMS chief, multiple EMS chiefs. And because John and I have pushed really hard for the transport, we want, liability issues. I mean, for me as a union president, I don't carry the weight of the liability issues for the city. So QAing, individual care on a transport unit is extremely important, for self-improvement. And then
Medicare, Medicaid,
all of this money
insurance, fraud.
we funneled into administrative positions, which when I first discussed with Jim is kind of not done. I mean, I don't think it's been done very often. So the union allowed that money to be put to that position. As of right now, I don't think it's in the budget, right, for
What's
this
that?
next year? The chief?
I don't know. Actually, I was gonna ask you if
I don't write the budget, so-
requisition has been made for that position. Are you aware?
We have not made a requisition, no.
Yeah, I just gave the money, I don't know what's going on with it, so that's where we're at. So that's why we want an accountability of what money's coming back, what money's not gonna come back, so we can make a better allocation that best suits the fire department moving forward.
And we just had concerns about taking this thing on and knew that it was gonna ramp up pretty quick, and we just wanted a commitment through those MOUs from the city that once the city realized how much money was coming in, that it just didn't get absconded with and moved to other places in the city and leave the fire department as it was in a status quo situation, trying to handle all of this new responsibility and the transport and the call load and equipment and the risks. So there was a desire from our table at the time to make sure that we were getting commitments to funnel that stuff back to specific elements that we felt were essential to the program as it was ramping up. So
Just
that's,
for clarification, and Johnny, it's just, the way you're saying it or the way I'm hearing it. So it's the pot of money that's coming in for transport that the union recommended, take some of that pot of money that's from transport that's going to the city and get an EMS chief. You're not actually taking
No, there
union
were,
money.
there are two pots of money.
Okay.
So when we
There's
sat down to
multiple.
do the MOU, there already was an accumulated amount. It was we were at 1.3 by the time we got.
1.3 million.
Yeah, we got to the table, it was like 1.3 had already come in. So there was, you'll see that MOU talks about in one paragraph, you pulling some of that out to specific, the training center, the sanitation equipment, and we knew, and then allocating that for the next 2 years, we were gonna set aside monies, so that's the second pot, future monies coming in to the assistant chief position and the quality assurance to fund that, because we knew that the department was gonna need those. And then 20% of that, and I don't even remember what that amount was at the time, I think it was 20% of 1.3 roughly, was moved out into a fire department education fund to send people for education and make sure that we covered, if we needed to cover overtime for on-duty training, that kind of stuff. So the question is, how much is left in that fund? How much, if any, is left in that original accumulated fund? And then kind of an accounting of how much is coming in now on a regular basis in a revenue stream. And again, I want to be clear that the concern from the union is make sure that the employees and the department as a whole had the resources to do this and do it right, do it safely, and to properly compensate the people. It's not our belief or our understanding or our proposal that all of that money that comes in, has to be spent in the fire department or has to be spent in this bargaining unit. That's not the point. But the point is to make sure that that we have some kind of mutual agreement that it will, some of it, because this system is now 2 years old or so, that we're going to support this system and make sure that we've got the equipment and the safety and the compensation for the people that are doing the work to generate that revenue stream. So we want to move some of that language from the MOUs into the stuff that doesn't sunset, into the contract so that those commitments can continue. And there may be other ideas we have about places that we can spend that money, both for the benefit of the city and the bargaining unit members, that may be contained in our proposal. But to do that, we've kind of got to get a handle on how much of that 20% is left, how much has been spent that was originally moved, how much of that original accumulated account that we were discussing at that time when we did the MOU, how much of that is left, and then kind of on an ongoing basis, what are we seeing as a revenue stream generated from this additional work and these additional responsibilities?
And you've been doing this a long time. I've been doing it a long time, especially negotiations. You can look at it two ways. There was no money coming in. We didn't have a penny when we wrote the original paperwork, but we had an estimate of 1.3 million. So rather than waking up one morning and the city realizing we're making 1.3 million and it goes in the general fund to offset Parks and Rec, I kind of secured that money. It was definitely not selfish. It was more of an understanding of the political process. I secured that money for the fire department to make improvements within the fire department and best protect the city under a liability issue where we were going to be directly transporting patients to doctors, because I know South Florida. So that's what this whole MOU is about, and that's why we need to know the money, because it allows the chief to develop a larger and long-term plan to implement transport in a manner where there's funding already. That's all this is.
Content sounds solid.
I tried, and you can take it either way, selfish, or you can think of it as not you,
No, I understand.
yeah.
All right, any questions on any of the stuff we've given you today?
Yeah, on your suggested ground rules, we had talked, it is understood that there had been conversation between the union and administration about who was there, that we were gonna have a scribe. And that as we talk about strike through, underline and bold, it was talked about that perhaps there would be one central person as opposed to this thing getting different ways. Does that sound reasonable?
That's fine. As we go, you mean creating the document as we go, making sure that we've
Yeah,
got them.
so essentially the lady that was supposed to be with us today but is in quarantine, that was going to be her responsibility, take care of taking minutes for the meeting and also taking the document and making changes so that everybody has one copy.
Yeah,
of
if we
what
can
we're
do
referring
that and
to.
get to the end of this
We
and all
can-
have
that's-
one clean copy, that would be
That's what we came
wonderful.
up the last one. right? 'Cause
And
it was screwed up, yeah.
the meeting is being recorded so that she
She can
has
do
that
that.
ability
Okay.
to do that.
Well, actually, John, I wasn't in the last one, so I don't.
Well, great, that's what, Chief, perfect.
Yep.
I actually forgot about that, but yeah, that's an absolute.
Yeah, that works great.
Lifesaver when,
And then we can extinguish all of these converted copies and the
Yes.
things walking around with these funky indents and the.
And I'm glad you came out of the gate with, hey, we're recording, because I was gonna hit on that myself. I'm like 3/4 of the way through all my president, or the President's Men book from Watergate. Hey, we don't want a
Always
Watergate
recorded.
situation.
it's always recorded. We've been to about 6 of these, so.
I
All right,
know,
any
I know.
other questions about any of this?
I'm actually going through and circling all the indents and.
Well, you got some work to do.
Perfect.
Self-appointed.
What's really scary, and I'll tell you, we worked off the same copy, made copies somewhere else.
Yeah.
And the copy I have from 2 days ago and the copy you just made last night are different.
Yeah.
But they both came from the same flash drive, which is, doesn't make sense to me.
Nor is it supposed to.
You know, it's simply, if you go to a different printing place, maybe they use a different program, I don't.
Sure.
But-
Before we, have an ending here, can we caucus?
Yeah.
Yeah,
In
for a
fact,
few minutes,
I-
let us.
To be honest, my sincere hope would be that you guys would caucus for a little while, and maybe before today's over, and if not today, then tomorrow. We'd really like to TA as many of these status quo ones as possible, if we can, and including any of the ones that
What's the
we
plan
gave
at
you
this
with
point?
changes,
We can talk about it.
Okay,
if we can.
sure.
Good jacket.
Would be a good idea.
Who's are these?
Those are mine.
Can I have one? Thank you.
A wise man once told me to never refuse a breath mint if you're not.
My mom used to say the same thing about gum. Can you close that door, please?
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're not recording?
We are.